Good morning, everyone. Very excited for day 2 of our conference. We are going to go ahead and get started with our first session for the day, entitled The Selfless Leader, Caring for Yourself When Your Job is Caring for Others. Our speakers today are Rachel Bosch, the founder of Fringe Professional Development, and Janelle Christian. So I'm Rachel. Rachel is an advocate for innovative and organizational professional development. She founded Fringe Professional Development to help people communicate better at work by bringing coaching and training to professionals across disciplines and experience levels. Rachel has spent more than a decade in talent management and has a background in theatrical performance and vocalization. She uses this experience as well as brain-based coaching certification through the Neuro Leadership Institute and a certificate of Women in Leadership from Cornell University when providing customized and progressive programming to help ambitious, high-achieving professionals excel at work. Rachel believes that everyone can improve at work by improving their communication skills. By integrating her work inside some of the top global organizations with research-backed performance and coaching tools, Rachel has been able to identify strategic paths to advance teams and individuals in careers. Rachel has been an active member of the invitation-only Forbes Coaches Council since 2019. In addition to her coaching credentials, Rachel holds a certificate in mediating disputes from Harvard Law School Executive School of Study. She is also certified to evaluate and train teams on the DISC behavioral assessment and the EQI 2.0 Emotional Intelligence Index. Welcome, Rachel. Joining her is Janelle. After nearly 6 years in big law as a Howard University School of Law graduate, Janelle transitioned into the career and digital media field through client work anchored in radical wellness and self-care. As a career strategist, Janelle works with legal professionals to gain clarity on their values, address and remove limiting beliefs regarding income and success, create a clear plan to define their life work, and guide them through any necessary pivots towards their dreams. Her work also includes bringing awareness to diversity, inclusion, and belonging issues, particularly in the workplace, as well as empowerment training for difficult conversations both at work and in life. Welcome, Janelle and Rachel.
Thanks, Whitney. And I think we're just waiting for Janelle to get into the session here, but I'm really excited to be here to be talking to you all today. I saw somebody in the chat earlier who said that today is World Kindness Day. And so I know that Janelle and I both feel this way, like this session is about kindness to yourself, to all of you. So we're just gonna wait and see if Janelle can get let into the stage, and we'll get started in just a second.
Janelle, if you just want to turn on your camera, I think that should do it. I see you as an attendee on stage, so just try that.
Hey, Janelle, if you're having an issue turning your microphone on first, and one of our tech teams will reach out to you as well.
Well, I'll go ahead and get started, and then I'll make sure that Janelle has time to introduce herself as well as we're having the conversation today. So like I said, I think this conversation really is about kindness to yourself. Janelle is really like the boundary queen. If any of you are familiar with Janelle and follow her on Instagram, you know that that is her specialty. I sort of feel like this session is interesting. As we were planning for it, it felt a lot of like, do as Janelle says, not as Rachel does. But I'm also trying to get better at this, at the idea of setting boundaries. There's Janelle. So You already heard a wonderful introduction from me. I don't need to tell y'all more about who I am. I will tell you that my pronouns are she, hers. And I am really looking forward, after spending so much time, sitting in the seat as one of your colleagues in recruiting, in talent development, now being on the flip side and talking to you about my experience on both sides of this with boundary setting is going to be really exciting. So with that, I'll let Janelle introduce herself and sort of set the stage for today's discussion.
Hi, everyone. I'm so sorry. I was a few minutes tardy. Remo did not want me to be great this morning. My name is Janelle Christian. I, after 6 years of practicing in big law in New York, DC, and Atlanta, I left to join the career and digital media field. My work is client work anchored in what I like to call radical wellness and self-care. And this summer, I joined Fringe, the Fringe team as a consultant, and my work is focused primarily on communications and diversity initiatives. So it's been really fun for me. So I'm very excited to be talking to this audience and to all of you, and boundaries are my homegirl. So I'm really, really pumped for this convo. So to set the stage just a little bit, I think whether, Rachel and I in our profession or all of you, we are basically paid for problem solving on a hamster wheel. It never ends. It is constantly spinning. Our work is amplified when awful events are happening in the world or when tragedy is happening. Other times when people want to downshift emotionally, it's our responsibility to upshift. And so that can be a huge burden. And I think, traditionally and somewhat stereotypically, we as a group have a habit of putting everyone before ourselves. It's somewhat the definition of our job sometimes. And so what today Rachel and I want to focus on is helping give all of us some skills where we can identify where we might be overly putting people before ourselves and give some tangible tools so that we can better center ourselves and our needs when our job is to focus on everyone else.
Yeah, and I think, if any of you are following Janelle on Instagram or Fringe on Instagram, we love to talk about allyship. And I see there's this interesting intersection here. When people talk about allyship, they talk about doing the work. It is one of my least favorite phrases because it means nothing. And so we try to be really tangible and define what that means. I think the same thing is true about boundaries, right? So everyone's like, I know I need boundaries, but no one knows how to do it. And there's an entire industrial complex on social media right now telling you to have boundaries, but very few people actually telling you how to do it. And I think we both want to recognize that in your roles inside law firms, it may feel like boundaries are inaccessible to you. It may feel as if you're working on other people's timelines constantly. When we were prepping for this, one of the things that came up for me is that, being inside of a law firm, you really start to realize that the entire structure is built on marginalization, and it's built on marginalization at every single level. Right? Even those of you who are on this program today who used to be practicing lawyers and then moved into a diversity and inclusion role, you will have probably experienced that instant marginalization. Once your title changed, all of a sudden you were not a timekeeper, you were not a revenue generator, and you were treated differently. So we want to recognize that, but still say there are options available to you. There are things that you can do, and it can be bite-sized. I think that's the thing that both of us are really here to tell you is we're not looking to change your life. We're not looking to change your schedule, but we will definitely try to help you take some small steps towards more wellness. I'll say I love seeing the things coming in on the chat. So we're going to interact with you all in the chat. So keep that coming. And I will put our Instagram handles in here as Janelle sort of tees up the next section.
Something I want to give a little disclaimer, is I think a lot of what Rachel and I are about to say may feel initially counterintuitive. And there's going to be a piece of everyone who says, but my situation is this, and you don't understand, it's going to be this way. And so what I'm hoping we do is you work through a little bit of that counterintuitive feeling you have boundary setting, I love to say with my clients, is a muscle, and it's very weak in the beginning. And so part of this, like it's going to feel like an impossible lift. So you have to lift a little bit. And then that first time you lift, it's going to be easier the next time. And that's the example I love to give. So like Rachel said, we love the chat. We're going to be keeping an eye on it and asking you guys some questions to participate. But also, if you have questions or anything you want us to talk about, we have time at the end. We would love to talk about those things. So to get us started, Rachel is going to nerd out on stress a little bit. Rachel, I think you're on mute.
There we go. Everyone loves to nerd out on stress, right? No. Okay. I just wanted to set a nice foundation here. We love talking in a research-backed way about what's happening with you. It helps sort of keep the skeptics at bay, but also to give you a little bit more sense of what's going on in a real way and not just like sort of anecdotal conversations of how you're feeling. So we're going to talk about stress and then lead into the action steps, because a lot of this conversation around boundaries really is stemming from stress. There's the stress that happens when you feel like you need more boundaries. There's the stress that happens when you're not setting boundaries. And then there's the stress that happens when you do set boundaries and you're worried about backlash. So there's stress all up in here. Okay. So when we're talking about stress, I always like to remind people that there are two core types of stress that we experience as human beings. There's episodic stress and there's chronic stress. There's the stress that happens to us just in these brief bursts, and there's the stress that happens to us over time that's more sustained. Human beings are designed to deal with both, but there are consequences to both. And for most of our lives, for all of the folks who are on this session, we have lived in a world where, for the most part, life is pretty easy in comparison to like our entire life cycle as human beings. Life now is easier than it ever has been. And we have a lot of skills to manage things, right? So you've got lots of resources, lots of skills. So most of us have actually sat in a place of boredom where we actually have to find things to fill our time and keep us excited. When you go back to primal days, what people experienced was a very difficult life, right? Your livelihood, your actual ability to stay alive was on the line maybe every day, and you didn't have a lot of skills. Either that's resource-based or human-based. You didn't have skills at your disposal, so you sat in a place of anxiety a lot of the time. So most of us, have really been trying to get into flow. That's all we've been seeking for our life. In 2020, though, we're feeling a lot of what our primal ancestors felt. We're feeling this deep anxiety, and this is not helpful for boundary setting, and it's not helpful for general well-being. So we want you to be aware of that idea that when you're in that sustained chronic stress, you're sitting in anxiety. So all of the time, you're feeling that pressure. So what do you do with that pressure? Well, you need to understand that it's encompassing you. It's also encompassing everyone around you. Emotions, and I know contagion is like not the word we want to use right now because we're in the middle of a pandemic, but emotional contagion is an actual phenomenon. It's very similar to yawn contagion, which I think still sometimes even works over virtual meetings. So if you're starting to yawn right now, I'm sorry, because just by saying it, it will happen. But emotions are also contagious. So when you're in this ball of stress, you are feeling it. Your family members are feeling it. Your colleagues are feeling it. Everyone is feeling it. It has this exponential impact as it starts to spread, much like any other thing that is susceptible to contagion, okay? So you've got to be able to figure out, first of all, whoa, things are not right. I'm feeling this imbalance. I'm feeling all sorts of stress. And then start thinking about what are the points where that stress is connecting to other people and other relationships in your life, okay? Now, when we talk about what keeps us in this glass case of emotion, what keeps us all sort of like bottled up and then about to just burst, it's that we don't do a good job with two aspects of emotional intelligence, of emotional management that are really important for being able to manage ourselves and other people. All right, so the first is reality testing. Now, the more stressed you get, the harder it is to manage reality testing. And it's exactly what it sounds like. So I want you to imagine that you have a deadline coming up and you feel like there's so much on your plate, there's no way you're going to achieve that deadline, but the managing partner is waiting for that report from you. And you say to yourself, well, I have to just stay up all night and get this done. Okay. You don't have the ability in that moment of stress to say, who set this deadline? Something that Janelle says to me all the time. Who set this deadline? Is this really a deadline? Is there something that you can do about this deadline? So you're not able to check in with the reality of the situation. Okay. So know that when you're in that stress moment, you're not doing a good job of setting in any sense of reality. Okay. The other thing is impulse control. Now, impulse control is going to work, it works the same way I kind of keep reaching into the pantry in quarantine. I have very little impulse control. The same thing happens with your behaviors when you're in a stress mode. So when you're in a stress mode, you're going to go back to your familiarity bias. You're going to go back to what is familiar to you, even if it's not good for you, because in stress, we go for comfort. Okay. So because impulse control and reality testing are both low in moments of chronic stress, that just being aware of that, just knowing that, having this conversation and listening to this right now means the next time you're super stressed, I want you to think to yourself like, okay, am I actually checking in on the reality of this situation? Am I just doing something because it's comfortable? Like, what is truly happening here? And that's going to help you just manage it. Now, the other thing is we need to know what human beings do when they're stressed. And this is an important just self-awareness check for all of you. These are the 3 stress reactions that we see from people. You project, meaning like I'm stressed out, so everyone else now needs to be stressed out. This is, I grew up in a Jewish household. So this is, I'm cold, please go put on a sweater, right? Then we ignore. So those are the people who try to just put their stress in a drawer and they're like, no, I'm not stressed. Nothing's happening. But you can see they are freaking out. And then there are the people who obsess over it. So like that report is due and you're like, oh my God, I got to get this report done. I can't think about anything else. Like the house could be burning around you and you're just typing the report. So we're curious. Let's have a moment of self-awareness, all of us together. I tend to be the obsessed person, but I want to see in the chat, like, what do you all do most? Do you project? Do you ignore? Do you obsess? What do you do, Janelle, mostly?
I'm obsessed too, 100% obsessed. Double down obsessed. Oh, lots of obsessed. I'm glad we're not alone.
Oh my goodness. Oh, Carlos, no, you need sleep. Sleep is very important to this
our people. We feel so loved.
I know, right? Like these really are our people. Oh my goodness. Okay. So this whole first section, this was really just like you starting to understand what's going on inside of this stress bubble that you are experiencing. So we're going to move from just this idea of here's the stress, here's how you identify it, see what you're doing with it. I will tell you, all of the research around stress tells us that instead of trying to hide from our stress, the best thing to do is to acknowledge it, to see what it's doing to you, and then to breathe into it. And that is so counterintuitive for most of us, even if you are an obsessor. You're like, no, I'm acknowledging it. No, you're obsessing about it. There's a difference. So instead, like try acknowledging it, just even thinking through like, ooh, maybe I am in chronic stress right now. Maybe my reality testing is low. Maybe I am obsessing. Just that little moment of self-awareness is already setting you on a path for success.
Yeah, I love that. I love that, Rachel. So now we want to chat a little bit. And really what we want to give you all are steps, because when you are in that obsession moment, we want you to work through a framework of sorts so that you can mitigate a little bit and control a little bit more. So the way Rachel and I view this is that there are pretty much 3 buckets of tangible action steps you can take. The first thing is that we can take things back. We can take things away. If too much is on your plate, you can wiggle it down. The next thing that we want to suggest is that you can put things back. A lot of times when I'm in that obsession mode, I'm just at my desk for 10 to 14 hours, but maybe I need to drink some water, or maybe I need to go for a walk, or something like that. And then the last bucket that's important for us, and I think important for this audience, is creating cultures and making sure that if you're leading a team, or even if you're a member of a team, you understand how stress is permeating, like Rachel said, and is very contagious, and how we can create intentionally a good culture for that. So let's start with taking things back. For me, as an attorney, I understood time, right? I very integrally understood the measure of time. When I moved over into my role as a consultant, I went from reviewing documents for 10 hours a day to having very emotionally laboring conversations for 10 hours a day. And the quality of that work is so different. I kept coming to Rachel and saying, like, Rachel, I'm wiped at the end of the day. I can't breathe. I feel like, my exhaustion levels, I'm working fewer hours, but I am like depleted at the end of the day. And Rachel really showed me a concept of emotional load, which I would love for you to share, Rachel.
Yeah. And I think like this is a really common thing for everyone to be experiencing based on different type of work that you do, right? And I just also want to say, particularly this audience, I've had so many conversations this year where I have heard from D&I folks that you are talking to all of your associates, like right when the pandemic started, when George Floyd was murdered. And so the idea that an hour of talking to an associate about the trauma that they're going through this year is the same as an hour of you putting in numbers on a report. Like, it's just not the same. And so if you're spending a little bit of time every single day having these deep conversations, you're going to feel exhausted. But most of us don't actually think about that process. We don't think about the different hours. We don't think about the weight of those things. So I actually just dropped into the chat. We've got a little workbook for you all today. And I'm also going to share my screen and I'm going to talk you through some of these activities as we're going. But this first one is this idea of emotional load, right? So what we want you to do is to just list out all the different things you do in your job, right? So writing reports, database work, talking to associates and business services professionals about what's going on with them. So you want to put that all in that left-hand column. And then this is a little art activity too, which statistically is shown to reduce your stress. So just a little extra benefit. You just want to grab something and color in the different depths that those are going to fill in terms of your emotional load. So like a light emotional load might actually leave you feeling energized and excited and give you energy. But a heavy emotional load is going to drain you. It's going to give you that feeling that Janelle was having at the end of the day. We feel that weight, but we don't usually go through the process of actually assigning it to a specific task or a specific activity. Janelle felt that. I felt it when I moved externally and was doing more coaching. I had to learn, and my law firm work ethic and my good girl complex were really killing me when I figured out I can't do 4 coaching sessions in a day. If I do 4 coaching sessions in a day, I cannot be a good friend. I cannot be a good daughter. I cannot be a good partner to my husband. I need to figure out where the energy can go. And there are some tasks that I can do just in perpetuity all day, every day. And so you've got to figure out what those different tasks are.
I agree with that 100%. And that kind of leads us into our next bucket. The first step is identifying how heavy all of these tasks are, which involves you writing them out. And I think that then leads to the to-do list, which this isn't 100% in our outline, but what I found to be very helpful was I was burdening myself with this to-do list and not taking into account the emotional load of each item. By switching from a task-based to-do list rather than just listing out everything you need to do to a schedule-based to-do list and saying from 10 to 2, I meet with clients, from 2 to 4, I eat lunch and hang out with my dog, and from 4 to 6, I do business work or whatever, then I can account for the load of things. So I'm not burdening myself with activity A through 4 activity 1 through 4, if activity 1 is going to take that entire 4 hours of time and all that energy. So just a little nugget to add to there. So that kind of leads us into putting things back. So the second big bucket, after focusing on taking things away and being intentional with, what you're having in your day, is putting things back. And the reference Rachel and I laugh about often is that we should start to consider ourselves more like plants. Because when I get stressed, I think it's a great example. I had to buy this water bottle that has times on the side so I can remind myself literally to be drinking water throughout the day. But what I think a lot of us tend to do is just strip down to the work when we are stressed and overwhelmed. We strip down to, this is the core essential and I don't need all the other parts, or I can figure that part out later. And so part 1 is physically making sure you take care of yourself. That looks like actually scheduling time for some things. And I utilize my work calendar. I will put in exercise twice a week on the calendar because for whatever reason, I have no problem honoring that meeting with Rachel or that meeting with a partner or meeting with a firm. But so I need to honor myself on the calendar with the same intensity. So putting things on the calendar that are important, putting triggers in place for yourself, water. So you remember something like this where you can remind yourself to be drinking a certain number of water a day. But another really, really big one for me is going outside. I talk to so many clients and they don't go outside for days at a time. I have a dog, so I have to go outside, and that eludes me that people wouldn't be going outside regularly. But vitamin D is so critical. If you're not going outside, make sure you're taking a vitamin D supplement. That's going to boost your mood so much. Make sure you're doing those physical, tangible things for yourself. But in order to get all of that stuff in, right, I've just added 5 things to your to-do list and to your plate. And the crux of this is now boundaries. And boundaries are a hard conversation because everyone feels like they're so personal. Everyone feels as though, they can or cannot exercise their boundary based on their situation. And I feel very strongly to the opposite. I feel that exercising your boundary is the highest honoring of yourself, and that you should be coming first in all these situations and trying as hard as you can to put you at the forefront of these decisions. Rachel and I were talking about this as we were planning, that it has become significantly harder to enforce our boundaries now that we've left the structure of the law firm. And, as much as, Rachel and I are running our own businesses, a lot of you all function in this, as if you were in an entrepreneurial role because you are the only person in your department. So if something doesn't get done, it falls on you at that same intensity that it was going to fall on one of us. And Rachel we were talking about the honesty of how we can execute those boundaries for ourselves.
Yeah, I was sort of surprised looking back, and it took me a little bit of space to really see it. But when I was in a law firm, I had stellar boundaries. I was like, nope, I come in at this time, I leave at this time. The work will be here tomorrow. And there is something about a lot of the work that we do, not all of it, and I want to draw that distinction, that it will be there tomorrow. And the firm is not going to fail or go under. I actually had a law firm counsel, one of my first firms I worked at. I was like, oh, I don't know. Should I take the weekend off? Well, I was going to go somewhere. And the counsel looked at me and goes, well, I don't know, Rachel, the firm might go under. And I was like, okay, rude, but thank you for putting me in check right there. I needed that, And so you realize that the firm will not go under if you set a few boundaries. Now, the difference is, I was talking about things that were more like performance related or recruiting related. I understand that what has happened, particularly in this year, is so much more deeply connected to your core values. If you are working in a D&I role, it feels like you do have to get it all done. And this is where that idea of you can't pour from an empty cup comes in. And I know that the work is very important, but I also know that you've got to find the space. And I'm talking to you, I'll be very honest, I'm coming to you all today in this conversation, not from the standpoint of somebody who's mastered this. I'm not taking care of myself. I have my pitcher of water off to the side, but it's empty because I haven't filled it in 2 days. I'm doing my best. And I think that that's kind of what Janelle and I want you to know, is that you can take these steps that we're talking about, you finding the things that you need to take out or put in balance, finding the things that need to be inserted back, but also giving yourself grace to screw it up. The interesting thing that happened when I left the law firm was, at the end of the day, if something did not happen, then it really was on me and my business could suffer. And so it took a lot of that weight onto me. And I think that that's what a lot of you all are feeling. And I see Corey and I see Tracy talking about how this is also, law firm environment doesn't lend itself to boundaries for young attorneys and for people of color. I would say, people of color generally, yes. Black women particularly, yes. And we see that in some of the reporting and research that's been done by the ABA. If you look at what happened during the last recession, we see who takes who the law firm is willing to cut at the end of the day. And we're hoping that it's going to be different this time. But we definitely do see that not everyone has the same opportunity for boundary setting, but that everyone has opportunity for some boundary setting.
And I also want to push back on that narrative a little bit, because what I actually have found in my clients, who primarily are young attorneys of color, is that there's an assumption that that's there, that the boundary setting is not going to be extended. But when I actually push people out and have them start small, right? I definitely am not telling people, if you normally work until 2 a.m. to say, I'm done at 6 and it's over, but to push it back a little and say, I'm going to bed at midnight. Midnight is my cutoff now, and I start it there. And then you push it back a little more. Now 11 is my cutoff, and you can slowly wind it back. I agree that there are limits to the way that you can place boundaries. And the hard part of this conversation now that I just know people are not going to love me saying is that it comes down to a values assessment. If the place you are working, if you want to be ending your work at 6 p.m. and the place you're working does not allow for that, that's a values assessment. That means that law firm is not for you. And I can say, as a personal example, I worked at a law firm that they had me out here till 2 a.m. every day. And so I found another major top 50 law firm that would let me go home at 6, because that became important to me. So I want to say that one. Two, I want to say, in terms of putting forth a functional, tangible step, my advice to law firm students, or to law school students, is you come in with the boundaries that you want. And I had such a wonderful example of that when I was a third-year associate. This first year came in, and her boundaries were solid. She was leaving at 7 every day. Maybe she continued working from home, but she left at 7, and she didn't work with the people who were going to yell at her or make her feel bad or make her feel small. And when she first started to exercise her boundaries, even me, as someone who is very, very good at boundaries, felt a particular type of way and thought, that's interesting that this first year is flexing her muscles that way. But you know what? She survived, and she did so much better mentally as a first year than I did. And I almost felt jealous, like, good for you. Like, I'm so proud. And she's still there at the firm, killing it and living a much better quality of life. So I do want to say there are examples of people who can do it. And I want you all to feel empowered to do it. I think it starts in these small steps. Like I said, it's a muscle we build, and we can't flip from 2 a.m. to 6 p.m., but maybe we flip to midnight, if that makes any sense.
I want you to talk about your dream list too, because I know that the naming convention might throw some people because it does feel dreamy. But it's one of the things that, as somebody who is chronically bad at boundary setting, was very helpful for me to find my tiny little bite-sized moments of boundary setting.
Mm-hmm. So I came up with this exercise for me right when I quit my job. Quitting the law firm to start my own business was about creating a life that I really wanted. And so what I did was I wrote out my dream schedule. I made a list of all the components that would make my week very full. That looked like a certain number of hours just outside with my dog. That looks like exercising every morning. That looks like journaling. That looks like having solid chunks of time to have meetings and solid chunks of time to do work on my business. And I just mapped it out on a calendar. And then I took that map and I colored over it in red everywhere where there was a current violation. So for example, I would love to start my day at 10 a.m., but I have meetings that start at 8. Or I would love to not meet with clients after 2 p.m., but I was meeting with them at 9 p.m. And so I just drew everywhere where there were issues. And then one by one, I took one meeting and tried to reallocate it and move it and put it in its appropriate section. And so actually we created for you all an exercise in the packet that Rachel shared that can help you simulate that exercise. It's the second of the worksheets on there. So you will be able to make the list of all the things that would make your life feel more complete and feel more full and really be the dream week for you. And then we want you to schedule it on here and actually map it out and how you can functionally put all these things together to make the time work. Then I recommend you make a copy of it and you can draw over it and show all the violations and just start cutting back one by one.
Yeah. And I think it's important to know that Janelle had violations. It was not perfect. I don't think it's still perfect. I think you showed me one from a couple of weeks ago that was
Maybe I can find it.
Red all over it.
Mhm.
But I know that this adding things back in, I think a lot of people think of boundary setting as only removing things, only taking things out. This is what I'm not going to do. But I think adding things back in is really important. So we were also curious, and we're sort of voyeuristic in this way. Like, what are y'all adding back in? Is it water? Is it sunshine? Let us know. Put it in the chat. I want to get some good ideas because I need better boundaries.
I don't know if you guys will be able to see, but this is my ideal schedule. And these are all the violations, just to show by example.
That's awesome. Exercise. That's a big one.
It's demonstrated, yes.
Yes. I was just going to say then we want to move to this next section because it is a 3-step process. And the next step is something that I'm really passionate about. Oh, Drew, tell us what you're cooking. I heard the New York Times is doing like all sorts of delicious things. Soups, it's soup season. Is it sweater weather? Can we say that? Is that too basic? Anyway, the next step on this is really important for those of you who are leaders. It's important for everyone, but it's something that I'm really passionate about in teams and with leaders. And that's this idea that you have to create standards and norms. So for those of you who have power, influence in your organization. And I would remind everyone that almost everyone has influence over somebody. We all have someone, whether we know it or not, who is watching us, who is learning from us, and who is taking their cues from us. So I think this idea of standards and norms and setting those structures is so important. And so we actually wanted to help you do that. So first of all, in the workbook that we put into the chat, I linked one of my favorite HBR articles on standards and norms. Those of you who know me know I'm obsessed with HBR. And there's a great article that talks about it. But the big things, the high points I want to touch on now, if you're on a team and you're trying to set standards and norms around boundaries, is that you've got to be really clear with everyone. You've got to create what is allowed, what you are willing to do, where you're wanting to flex. And you also have to describe behaviors really, really specifically. There should be no undefined terms for my former lawyers out there. You want to tell people exactly what they can do, where they can flex, and how they should communicate that boundary to you. And then you've got to talk about it. And so we actually gave you in the workbook just a sample email, because I know that just sitting down to start that can be hard sometimes. Take it, whittle it up, make it sound like we are happy for you to do that. But what I think is really important when you do communicate out to your team is to give them that structure and give them permission. One of the things that we really wanted to put in that sample email for you, and that I would encourage you to do, whether you're writing this from scratch, having a verbal conversation, or using our template, is to ask your team members what we just asked you. What do you want to put back? What do you need to add? Because as a leader, one of the best things that you can do if you are asking people around you to set boundaries, which is, by the way, a great way to help you set your own boundaries, is to not just help them take away, but then say, like Janelle told me about the water thing. So now when Janelle and I talk, I'm like, how you doing on your water? What's happening? Have you been drinking it today? And so I can support Janelle in that. And if she knows what I'm trying to add back in, she can support me with that. And so you want to be able to talk about that. And that creates this system of accountability back and forth between you and your team. I mean, I know, Janelle, like you have some really good boundaries. You've got a fantastic team of interns. And I would love if you talked about how you set some boundaries with them, because I know particularly with communication, you've got some good ones.
Yeah. So I have an awesome team of 5 interns working for me for my consulting firm. And from the start, to me, the best way to help them set boundaries, because they are students and I knew they were not experienced here, I wanted to set some boundaries for them or empower them to at least be able to set the boundaries. And so we are all connected on a Slack channel. I think everyone might know what Slack is, but if not, it's like a group messaging app that you can have on your computer or on your phone. And I let them know, hey guys, I work weird hours. Sometimes I might get in bed and just be, doing some work while I'm watching Real Housewives. I saw you all talking about reality TV. I'm guilty as well. So I might be doing work at 11 p.m., 12 p.m., like 12 a.m. Don't worry, that's not meant for you to respond. That's just the time I'm going to be working. You can set notifications so that your app is on sleep and you have certain times that you're not receiving notifications. Make sure you turn those on so I don't interrupt your day. And I mean, they were so thankful to have someone say, oh, wow, I've had other internships and I've always felt pressure to respond when that boss has sent me an email in the middle of the night. I never once considered maybe that was just the time they got to it. And I think even, working with lawyers and law firms, we feel the same. When we get those email pings, that Outlook noise is like an automatic reaction to open your email. And so it's okay. And it's helpful if you are in the leader position to help set the standards for people and let them know very transparently what your boundaries are and how you can help them set up their own. Someone in the chat, I think it was Paulette, mentioned you need to get better at saying no. And I think we all do. I actually was at a conference a few months ago and they had a great activity that I want to share, which was we sat down with another person and we sat across from them and we just said no to the other person. And when we did it, the first time we did it, the whole room started laughing. And the facilitator said, it's funny to you all because it's so rare to hear yourself saying those words. And we were like, oh, she snatched our edges with that one. Like that was so real. And she said, if you don't have someone who you can do this exercise with live, you can stand in the mirror and just say no over and over, maybe 10 times. And you'll be amazed at how empowered you are to just start using it more. But I saw that and I think that was a good exercise. So that one other thing I think to because all of this ties to boundaries so tightly, something that Rachel and I were discussing when we were getting ready for this was the line where someone is enforcing a boundary and it infringes on your boundary. And so an example she gave was, what if I'm working on a project and the person who was supposed to be helping me has something going on and needs to duck out, but the project's due tomorrow. And how do I balance that? And for me, that it is not my responsibility to navigate how other people receive my boundaries. If there are negative repercussions from me exercising my boundaries, that is a burden that I do take on, but my priority is caring for myself. And so I can deal with the repercussions, I can deal with the discomfort, but I still choose to put myself first, and I surround myself with people who are going to support and hold that together. That being said, there is a what I like to call a discomfort analysis always involved in boundary setting. And the discomfort is either that you are going to make someone else uncomfortable or you're going to make yourself uncomfortable. I am okay if sometimes the balance is that you're willing to make yourself uncomfortable in order to help the team. The problem arises when you are always making yourself uncomfortable for the benefit of everyone else. And so a skill that Rachel actually taught me some years ago was to tally. I'm a crazy tallier. So now if I'm a boundary's coming up, I know this is about to be a violation, I will tally how many times in a week I go against myself versus someone else. And at the end of the week, that list cannot be more against me than other people.
Yeah, and it's a hard one. This is the area where, and I mentioned it earlier, my good girl complex gets me in trouble all the damn time. I want to serve, I want to take care of other people. This happens a lot. Talk about standards and norms. I feel like I've set really good standards and norms with my teams to allow them to have boundaries, but that oftentimes comes at the expense of myself. And so figuring out how you measure those, when Janelle and I first started talking about this, I had a lot of feelings about the idea that you would just put yourself first. And I think when I step back from that, and I think of that from a neuroscience or an individual psychology point of view, when you have a reaction to things like this, people always tell you to trust your gut. And I have said for the longest time, trust but verify your gut. Right. So your gut is not necessarily, when my gut says oh, somebody set that boundary and now it's going to infringe on me, that's not necessarily saying that person did anything wrong, but that's a place where I should get curious. And most frequently when we get curious about that feeling, what we are finding is that we are wishing that we could do the same thing. that we are wishing we felt empowered to say no, that we are wishing that we could sit in the seat that that person was sitting in. And I think that that's really important. If you are seeing, like, when Janelle had that first year and she was like, well, who are you? Like, I'm sorry. That is a time for Janelle to say, like, whoa, maybe it's time to check in on my boundaries. And so the other thing that we talked about is this idea that your boundaries are very important. They are part of your value system and they help keep you healthy and safe, but they should not be a single track dirt road. Sometimes your boundaries need to be a 2-lane road or a highway, right? So sometimes you're still moving in the same direction, but you can flex a little bit on them. And you do that because you make that calculation that Janelle was just talking about. You sit there and you think, well, how much discomfort do I want to deal with? Maybe the right answer sometimes is not that I take on the discomfort or somebody else takes on the discomfort, but that we each sort of meet in the middle of that discomfort. And I think that that is, when I think about how do you apply all of this into an internal role, that skill of being able to flex and choose and identify where the discomfort should sit is helpful. I also do think that you should tally. You should tally everything. You should tally how many times you say a buzzword you're trying to minimize. You should tally how many times you do anything, because this is like the old school, what gets measured gets managed. Somebody in this conference told me 2.5 years ago that I said you guys too much, especially in groups of all women. And I had started tallying it. And it was the only thing that helped me move to the very Southern y'all.
I love y'all.
But it
Y'all
works.
guys are great.
Tally, tally, tally.
Yeah. Another point I'd like to bring up in terms of like the creating culture bucket. Around when we started all going into lockdown for coronavirus, I polled my audience to see whose companies and corporations were acting in a way that made them feel safe and made them feel comfortable and created space for them in this changing environment. And overwhelmingly, none of the people who said that were reacting well were law firms. They were startup companies and tech companies. And some of the ideas for helping to create the culture came from that. And the best one is that the person's supervisor sent out a survey, a sheet to everyone, and it had, what hours are your kids homeschooling? What hours are you at work? What time is lunch? What times can I expect that you're going to be answering things? What times should I not email you at all? And just asking people flat out what those boundaries were. And they all submitted them back to the boss so that he had everyone's times and he knew when he could talk to people and reach out to people, or could at least anticipate was the response that so-and-so is homeschooling from 1 to 3. So I can email them during that time, but it's going to be really hard for them to get back to me. I think at a baseline, just asking the people who work with you and for you is going to be really, really powerful.
Janelle, the tallying. People are very excited to tally.
I love the tallying.
It's
I'm
so
glad.
good.
I'm glad.
I know that we want to get to questions, and I know that we've got about 13 minutes left. So I'm wondering, Janelle, was there anything else that you wanted to add before we pitch over to questions? And I know we put this in the chat, but I'm going to share up on the screen how you can get in touch with all of us right now too.
I think the last boundary pushing point I think I'd like to make is people, there's one example, which is how do I not allow my boundary enforcement to infringe on someone else's right? Another one is, how do I even take that step to start to enforce my boundary? And we were talking about it in the context of like a law firm partner. If a partner gives you a deadline and it's now becoming apparent that something's happening, or you'll need to infringe on your own personal boundaries to make this happen, what do you do? The first step that Rachel alluded to, my first question is always, is this a real deadline? And so that might look like, in a timely fashion, going back to the person who gave you that work and that assignment or that task and saying, these 5 things are on my plate. Is this deadline any movable? That might help you reassess. Another way that I kind of punt back deadlines, and I tell my associates to punt back deadlines, there is no one is measuring how much work is coming in, and back to our like emotional load, right? People are giving you tasks, but no one is actually in these law firms measuring how much you can actually get done in a time frame. There is a reality where people have given you more than you can get done in a time frame that's realistic. And when that happens, my tip to people is to remove yourself from that scenario. So if person A gives you a task and person B gives you a task, and it's now apparent that these two tasks can't get done at the same time, I let them both hash it out. I am not the person to decide what gets done and what doesn't. I let you all come to the decision of who's going to be creating the more urgent deadline. That's one of my like go-tos. Another is, if you have a boundary, let's say your boundary is so audacious that you want to sleep 7 hours a night, right? If that boundary is getting infringed over and over and over again, I do want to lean into, there does come a point where we question if there's another opportunity to achieve this goal, this end goal, this work, somewhere else that will honor this boundary for you. Not every corporation is the perfect fit for you, and that doesn't make that corporation bad. In fact, it makes it like, thank God it exists for someone else to thrive. But the fact that other people and everyone around you is thriving in this environment and you're having a hard time is not a reflection on you. And it's okay to make a values assessment change based on that.
I think that's exactly right. I think, this idea of values right now is so important to all of us. I'll sort of like share. I was talking to a group of almost 200 law students last night, and we were talking about authentic interviewing, but I kept trying to push this idea because I'm always asked this by students, like, well, what brand does the firm want me to have? Because I'll have that brand. And I'm like, that is a fool's errand. You don't want to go down that road. This idea that you want to be yourself and find the right fit for you. It is out there. There is an organization that is right. And then, in the Q&A, a bunch of the students wanted to know, well, how do you find out about firms' values? And I could not be speaking to a more perfect audience for this right now. Like, the internet and what people have said, what people have not said this year, I think is super, super telling. And checking in with yourself. And I want to recognize that, like, that's scary. So when you are realizing I'm in an organization right now and it is not a good value fit for me, there's a lot of fear associated with that. But fear is actually an acronym. This is so cheesy, but I've said it a million times. Fear is an acronym. False events appearing real. Nothing has happened yet, right? What you do know and what you should be fearful of is the fact that you are in a place that is not in alignment with your values, and that will erode your self-esteem, your boundaries, your commitment, your drive faster than anything. So I'll stop preaching on that.
We have been getting some great questions already, so let's jump to answer some of those. One I think we can start with is, how do you go about introducing boundaries when you haven't been enforcing any without people interpreting your boundaries as slacking or decreased work ethic? Okay, I think that is twofold. I think the advanced level of boundary exercise is not giving someone a reason for the boundary. So when I, now as someone who I feel very confident in my boundary setting, I will set a boundary and not give a reason. When you're just starting out, I think you lean into the reasons, which at my heart and soul, I want to tell you, don't tell anybody what you're doing on your vacation, but actually that's probably the easiest way for you to get started. An example I've been helping, strange connection correlation. A lot of my New York associate clients work through their weekends, and that's like their one pain point. They hate working Saturday and Sunday. And a way that I help them push a reason is, I'm going to be observing my religious holiday on Sundays from 10 to 4 p.m. I'm not going to be available during this window, but I'll be available outside of this, just so they can carve out some space for themselves on Sunday. Myself, this is going to sound, I'm embarrassed to say it, but it's true. I got a dog because I felt as though it was really hard for me in the evenings to go home, but I felt like it was a lot easier for my colleagues with kids to go home. I'm not saying their lives were easier by any means. I'm saying they had a reason. So I got my dog, who is the love of my life, but as a reason, I wanted a reason that I couldn't just be in the office all night. I needed to go home for something. And my dog has served a lot of other lovely life purposes. But that was a reason I needed to not be in the office after 7 p.m. because I live alone and someone had to take my dog out. So I don't think it's bad to start with a reason. And I also want to reiterate that you start small. I think that people may look poorly on boundaries when you do drastic changes. So for example, if you normally are working 7 days a week and you wake up one day and say no Saturdays and Sundays, that's going to feel drastic to people. But if instead you carve out some time on Sunday and then you tell people Sundays aren't available, and then you tell people Saturdays and Sundays aren't available. Another really good trick for boundary setting is setting a calendar invite in your calendar, because it's easy to tell someone I have another meeting at that time. And maybe that meeting is that you sit outside at the park for 30 minutes by yourself with a podcast on, but no one's going to ask you what the meeting is about. And so I put it on my calendar so it's really no one can schedule over it. And because I can say it to myself easily, I have a meeting during that time.
You can also, and I encourage you to do this, pad your meetings. So you can do that in 2 ways. You can either add extra calendar appointments on either side, just blank calendar appointments that help pad it, or start setting meetings. She is the love of your life. She is the love of her life. Or start setting your meetings on 45-minute increments or just shy. So you could also do like a 55-minute meeting, because people only schedule meetings on the half or on the full hour. And so if you schedule your meetings for 25 minutes or 55 minutes, you're going to get a little bit of a break. That's harder because then you have to actually end the meeting. But at least if people get the calendar appointment for 55 or 45 minutes, then they know that that's the end of it. That's when that's going to happen. I think, we didn't get into the skills of actually setting boundaries, but we both, I know, agree, because we talked a lot about this, that the number one skill you can have if you're going to set boundaries is being able to manage difficult, uncomfortable conversations, because there's just a slew of them. There was another question in here that I saw that I really wanted to touch on. I think it's if you are socializing with firm management. That's the one that I wanted.
Yeah, I'm glad you picked that one.
So I think it depends. So it's a difficult conversation. I do think it depends on your relationship with firm management. I recognize that as an external person, I can poke the bear. Janelle can sit down with firm management and be talking about diversity and inclusion initiatives, and she can poke the bear more than y'all can poke the bear. And we know that. But I saw that question. I immediately started thinking about a conversation I had with a law firm leader who was just like really wanted to improve diversity in their firm. And they were just saying to me, like, Rachel, I will do whatever you tell me to do. Which I sort of wanted to say, like, have you ever said that to your internal D&I people? Because they probably have some ideas. But they were coming in earnest, and I took it in that spirit. And we started talking particularly about women at the firm. And we started talking about this idea that law firms, especially for rising associates and more senior folks into partnership, is a 24/7 job. I hate that phrase. And I said, well, I can tell you about the research on women in the workforce and women's responsibilities at home, regardless of the makeup of their home. And what that research tells us is that women don't have 24/7 to put towards work. And so I actually used a question, and it was a provocative question. So I'm going to say that I know that I had a little bit of power as an external person to say this, but I said, I'm sure you're not telling me that women can't be successful here, right? And so when you phrase it like that, when you talk about what the impact is, I think that is really helpful. And I know we have so many questions left, and we only have 2 minutes left. And I'm going to put Janelle on the spot, actually, and I hope it's okay. But I think one thing I want to point out is that there are consequences to not setting boundaries. And Mila might not let us have this conversation, but there are consequences, and I feel like we're starting to feel them. There's so much research around how we are all starting to feel more depression. People who've never felt depression in their life. Now, when you go through the list of things to check off if you're depressed, you're checking off more than you ever have before. But even prior to 2020, there are consequences. You know where I'm going, Janelle? Yeah.
I think too, the catalyst for me and the catalyst for every one of the clients I work for to leave the law firm has been a boundary infringement or a racial incident. And if you're talking about attrition, if you're talking about wanting to keep people of color in your workforce, boundaries aren't just something nice you do because people have mental health concerns. It's something that is make or break for people to continue at this place of employment. It is now a critical line item in attrition, I believe. Is that what you're getting at, Rachel? Did I answer?
No, I was getting at your origin story. Thinking about the consequences, the actual physical human consequences.
So the reason Hey Jay, the reason I started my consulting firm, two of my very, very close friends, both they were junior associates at law firms, one in New York, one in DC. They were Black men, and they both overdosed. And I just realized how unwell people are, especially in this profession, and the extent that we go to soothe and try to quell the pressures that we're feeling. And for me, I mean, boundary is the cornerstone of everything I do because I really think it is the center of your wellness and well-being. And by considering people's boundaries, it's not just a nicety that we're doing, it really could save someone's life. Is that it? Did I hit it?
That was it. And I know that Janelle has shared that story publicly before. So I think when we think about what these consequences are, putting it in real human terms is important. So it might just feel like you're saying no to the mirror today, but it has an impact, and it has an impact on yourself and the people around you. And it could save somebody's life.
Yeah, literally. This was awesome.
No,
I love talking to you guys. I know. I love it. I love talking to you too, Rachel. This is my fave.
Oh, that was so great. Thank you, Rachel and Janelle. It was a great conversation and so timely. I mean, as you can see from the chat, we are all resonating with everything you said. It's always great to have you both. Thank you, everyone. We actually have a 15-minute break. Janelle and Rachel, I don't know if you're going to hang around in the floor plan for a little bit, but feel free to chat them. They both have chat abilities if you want to get a question in before they leave, or if you guys decide to hang around. So we'll go to a 15-minute break and we'll be back at 12:30. Thanks, everyone.
Bye, everyone.